In May of 1903, an old man returned to the land of his birth. Chief Red Cloud was 78 years old, his hair white, his body weakened by age and years of loss. He had not walked this land in 40 years. For decades earlier, the United States government had forced his people from their ancestral home and relocated them hundreds of miles away to a reservation. The land he was returning to now was the land his people had lived on for generations beyond counting. It was the land where he had been born, where his parents had raised him, where his grandparents and ancestors were buried. It was the land that had shaped his people's identity, culture, and spirit. For 40 years, Red Cloud had lived on the reservation. He had watched his world slowly collapse. The reservation was overcrowded, underfunded, and controlled by distant authorities who neither understood nor respected his people. Disease spread easily there. Food was scarce. Traditions were discouraged or outlawed. Children died young. Elders passed away without ever seeing their homeland again. Ceremonies were interrupted. Language faded. What had once been a proud, self-sustaining people was reduced to survival under constant pressure. As the years passed, Red Cloud watched his culture erode piece by piece. He saw the damage not only in the land, but in the people themselves. He carried the weight of knowing that everything his ancestors had fought to protect was slipping away. By the time he reached the end of his life, he knew he would never reclaim what had been taken. All he wanted was to see it once more, to stand on the land of his childhood before he died. So in May of 1903, he made the journey back to South Dakota. The journey itself was exhausting. Every mile carried memories. Every turn brought him closer to something he had dreamed of for 40 years. But nothing prepared him for what he found when he arrived. The land was unrecognizable. The sacred burial grounds where his ancestors rested had been plowed into farmland. The earth that once held stories, prayers, and bones had been torn open by metal blades and turned into fields for crops. The river where his people had fished for centuries had been dammed and diverted, its flow controlled for industry and irrigation. The forests where his ancestors had hunted, where children had learned to track animals and listen to the land, had been cut down for timber. What had once been living ecosystems were now cleared, measured, and sold. White settlers' houses stood where Red Cloud's village had once existed. Homes, barns, fences, and roads covered the ground where families had gathered, where council fires had burned, where songs had been sung. The place where Red Cloud had been born no longer existed. The place where his parents and grandparents were buried was hidden beneath plowed soil or private property lines. Everything that had made this land sacred was gone. Red Cloud stood where the center of his village had once been. He knew the place by memory, even though no trace of it remained. A settler's barn now occupied that exact spot. Wooden walls and a pitched roof stood where elders had once spoken, where decisions affecting the future of the people had been made. The ground beneath the barn had once been alive with voices, ceremony, and community. The man who owned the land saw Red Cloud standing there and told him to leave. He said this was private property. He said Red Cloud was trespassing. He threatened to call the police if the old man did not move on. He did not know, or did not care, that Red Cloud's claim to this land went back centuries before his own. He did not see an elder returning home. He saw only an unwanted presence on land he believed belonged to him. To Red Cloud, this moment carried the full weight of history. He was being told to leave land that had been stolen from him. He was being treated as an intruder on the ground where his life had begun. The language of ownership had erased the truth of what had happened. The land was no longer seen as taken. It was simply considered settled. A photographer documenting the displacement of Native Americans happened to be there. He captured Red Cloud standing in the place where his village had once been. The photograph showed an old man surrounded by farms where forests had once grown. Behind him stood the barn. Around him stretched land that had been stripped of its past. His face carried a grief deeper than age alone could explain. It was not only the grief of memory. It was the grief of finality. Red Cloud understood then that there was no return. The home he had carried in his heart for 40 years no longer existed in the world. It had been erased so completely that strangers now lived on it without knowing what had come before. The land had been transformed in a way that made restoration impossible. Even if he were allowed to stay, there was nothing left to stay for. He left without protest. He did not argue with the settler. He did not raise his voice. There was nothing left to defend. The destruction had already been completed. Red Cloud never returned again. 2 years later, he died on the reservation. He was 80 years old. He was buried far from the land that had shaped his life, far from the ancestors who rested in unmarked, disturbed ground, far from the rivers, forests, and plains that had once defined his people. He died in a place that was never meant to be home, because home had been taken, altered, and replaced. At his funeral, his grandson spoke about that final journey. He said that his grandfather had returned to their ancestral land in 1903, hoping to see it one last time. Instead, he found burial grounds plowed under, sacred sites destroyed, and every connection to their history erased. He said that the photograph taken that day showed his grandfather standing where their village had once been, grieving not only the loss of land, but the destruction of everything tied to it. He said his grandfather had been forced off that land 40 years earlier and spent decades on a reservation watching his people suffer. When he finally returned, there was nothing left to return to. The loss was not accidental. It was deliberate. The destruction of land, culture, and memory was not just displacement. It was cultural genocide. The grandson said that his grandfather died knowing that home no longer existed except in stories. That the land had been taken, reshaped, and claimed by others who denied its past. That the photograph captured a moment of mourning, not just for a place, but for an entire way of life. Chief Red Cloud's return was not a reunion. It was a farewell. The land remembered him, even if the people who occupied it did not. When land is taken from a people, it is not only territory that is lost. History, culture, memory, and identity are erased along with it. Remembering and sharing these stories is one way to honor those who were silenced and to keep the truth alive. Like and subscribe message. If this story made you think or feel something, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so these histories are not forgotten.